skills of working on a hand loom? Because you also use industrialism, am I using the right word? You also use...
Yes, I mean, that's actually the industrial side I've discovered actually working with the hand looms and people that I've been meeting in Ireland and the West Coast who are using the industrial looms, and just actually seeing the skills involved and many of the shared skills with the hand loom weaver. So yeah, but the hand loom skills are ones that definitely they're very precious to us, and they are also, as much as the designs, it's sort of keeping that skill alive over here in the Mournes, especially. I mean, this is where we've been based since the late 40s, early 50s. So it's felt a slight responsibility to try and keep that skill here. It's very relevant for our location to have these sort of slightly small scale cottage industry skills.
Absolutely, and it's in your case, I mean, I think maybe before your grandmother's time, I mean, there's almost this link back to the home arts and industries, isn't there? What was happening in the late 1800s and early 1900s, almost continuing that tradition in a way of home industries.
Yeah, I think it's very, I mean, it's very community based. It's sort of, you know, we feel that we really are part of the fabric of Rostrevor, if you want to put it that way. We were part of, you know, this is where we've been based. I mean, all the farmers around us, they you know, I keep meeting people and they, oh, I remember your grandmother, or they went to there's a primary school next door to the workshop. A lot of them went to the primary school, and so we feel very connected with our environment, which is also where a lot of the designs are also very influenced by the environment around the workshop. So it's very much a people and our place. It's just very, very important to us in many aspects of the workshop, whether it's in the production side or within the design elements, you know, the shades that are coming in from outside. They sort of exist on the tweeds. And it's the same with the yarns that are spun in Donegal. I mean, they have the Donegal net, and they've got this fleck, and those flecks that you see in the yarn are actually influenced from the flecks that you'll see in the mountains around. So, you know, there's rocky outcrops or even sheep. Just, you know, it's the texture all around us. We try and recreate on fabric.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mario. I think we will, moving on to Cara Murphy, and hi to Cara. Somebody else who's using traditional techniques learned from the generation before her, but in Cara's case, it's silversmithing. And Cara creates beautiful sculptural tableware and objects. Cara works, has learned skills from and works alongside her father, Michael McCrory, who is a well-known silversmith, and of course has also inherited skills from her mother, Deirdre McCrory, a renowned enameler and a printmaker. And I think the wonderful thing from her and I when we were talking to Cara, which we didn't know initially, was learning that her daughter, Caitlin, is now continuing the silversmithing family tradition today, and is studying silversmithing and jewellery at Glasgow's School of Art. Exactly 30 years, I hope you don't mind me saying that, Cara, from when you started studying. So it's wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful that it's moving on to the next generation. So hi, Cara, you're very welcome.
Hi there, nice to see everybody. Yes, I'm very fortunate, having grown up as a, you know, within a family of makers. This is a very strange time for everybody. It's particularly strange for us because we live beside each other and we are used to seeing each other 24/7. So not seeing each other is very, very difficult during lockdown. So I know that my mum and dad and Caitlin are on, so I'm going to give everybody a little wave, say hopefully soon. I think that being asked to be involved in this generation exhibition has been really, really fantastic, and my fingers are crossed that we will get to Kilkenny and see all your wonderful hard work and see the exhibition in situ. The 100 Bowls piece that I decided to put into the exhibition it was kind of, when I was invited to do it, it was a kind of a no-brainer, because it was such a personal, important piece to me, and it very much ties in the work of my mum and my dad. And if Caroline, you could share the images. This image was taken by my son Ross just before the exhibition. I realise now that once lockdown is finished and once we get back together again, we need to get a photograph that also includes Caitlin in the image. I share a workshop with my dad, and if you could go to the next image, Caroline, we sit very, very close together. So the bench nearest to the wall is mine, and the one beside it is my dad's. So we are really sitting about 6 to 8 inches apart. Our workshop has got a huge amount of tools. We are very, very messy workers. We can never find anything. But that idea of being able to work alongside another craftsperson is a really important part, because for so many craftspeople, we are working in isolation, and especially with this, it's even more isolated. So being able to have a sounding board is really important. It's not necessarily that we're looking for any kind of confirmation. Quite often it's nearly the opposite. You know, if somebody says, oh, I like that, then you're thinking, I'm not sure. But so it keeps us on our toes, and it's been a fantastic way to really experience, as Frances said, that idea of the craft that we are doing with silversmithing is the same tradition that has been in Ireland for hundreds of thousands of years. You know, we're not doing anything different. We're not doing anything new in what we're doing when we're taking a flat sheet of metal and we're using the hammers in the background and hammering. But working alongside my dad for over 15 years has been developing the process of deep drawing. And with that, if you go to the next image, Caroline, with that, it's using the hydraulic press, and it's using the hydraulic press, and it's using the lathe to create steel tools so that we can press the silver and create forms that can be repeated. And so with that, when you look at the little bowls in the exhibition, they are all pressed. And so that idea of being able to use something that I have got that skill from Dad is really really interesting, and I've used it quite a lot in my work. So there you can see the lathe and the press and some of the tooling. The enameling came at a much later date. I was asked in 2011 to create a piece for the desk set at Downing Street by the Silver Trust. And obviously this was a fantastic commission to have received. And when I did that, I wanted it to have green enamel on it, because I wanted it to say, you know, Ireland, Northern Ireland on the Prime Minister's desk. So my mum very kindly did the enameling for that. And from that, I started to work more closely with my mum. When I say I worked more closely with her, I probably did her head in, because I was constantly saying, I'd quite like that yellow, or I'd quite like this. So she was enameling for me of things that I was interested in.
That's interesting, Cara. Sorry. So was that project the catalyst for you beginning to kind of work more closely with your mum?
Yeah, I had never used any enamel before in my work. I'm always interested in using other materials with my work, but I hadn't used enamel. And so that was the catalyst for using enamel and using color, and realizing, you know, I love color, I love green. So from that, I did, you know, quite a bit of work with her. I suppose a bit like lockdown, coronavirus, things happen in our lives that make us kind of reevaluate things. And in 2016, I wasn't very well. And that really made me sort of think, there's things I need to do. If you know, if I got to try and think about what is my direction as a silversmith, what is it that I'm going to want to do? And I realized that if I didn't learn that skill of enameling, then it could get lost. And so I applied to the Rosie James Memorial Trust with the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and they very thankfully gave me the Rosie James Award, which was a huge boost and grant that allowed me to explore enamelling and get my mum to teach me to enamel. And that's really where these little bowls that you see in the exhibition came from, because as a three-dimensional maker, quite often if we're testing, if you're in ceramics and you're testing glazes, or if you're testing enamels, the thing to do is to do it on, if I hold that up there to the screen, you're doing it on little flat bits, and it doesn't really work. So I decided that what I actually really wanted to do was to enamel three-dimensionally. And so that's where I started to do the little bowls. So I kind of set the bar very high to begin with. And I just then started to create the pieces that would mean then that I was exploring not only learning enamel, but doing it three-dimensionally. As you've said, Frances, we're in this lovely position that we've grown up in a family of makers. And I think, my two children, who are no longer children, they're in their 20s, they grew up in that making culture as well, because we lived beside my mum and dad. And so quite often they would say, could you fix this, mum? Could you fix that? And, I would always try. Sometimes I would succeed. But quite often, if I couldn't, it was, well, if you can't fix it, Papa can fix it, because Papa can fix everything. And so that idea of watching their creativity has been really lovely. Ross is a musician and a wedding photographer, available for bookings in Ireland. But yes, as you've already said, really nice to see Caitlin on her journey, and now just finishing silversmithing jewellery second year at Glasgow School of Art. And I was really excited to be able to allow her to be part of this exhibition too, because I think that just watching them, I was never pushed to say, this is what you must do, and I think that one of the things you were asking in terms of tradition and family tradition was, we've never pushed, Chris and I have never pushed our kids to say you must be creative, or you must do this, or you must do that. Or I hope they would say we hadn't said that. And I think that idea of finding your own path and being your own voice, and really starting to think what is it that you want to do is really important. I think we've always had a sort of a family mantra in our house that's kind of been, there's a solution to every problem. And I think that's really more what I want them and everybody else to take on board, is that idea that, we all don't really know where we're going, but it's a really interesting journey we're all on.
Absolutely, and it's very important that you raise the notion of the culture of making. You're here because you're experts, and you've reached a very high level of expertise in particular disciplines, but making is broad. It can be fixing a gate, it can be making a bookshelf, it can be
Absolutely.
So many things, and that you've grown up in this environment is wonderful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was also nice to hear you say that, not only does sitting side by side with your father, you get obviously reassurance and encouragement, and there's some help with skills, but it's also challenging you, isn't it, Cara? It's also such as saying, well, maybe you might look at that piece again. That's really important as well.
Well, anybody that knows us would say we're strong-minded people. So yes, I'm not going to. Yes.
So it's really great. Cara, thank you so much. I think probably the thing that Myrna and I regret so much about everything that's happened in the last few months is that everybody doesn't have the opportunity to physically see the work created by all of these people. Cara's beautiful, very beautifully crafted, exquisite pieces that make up that wonderful piece called A Sense of Place. And I think our final participant today, Mark, none more so for Mark, because Mark is working in lusterware, and images or video just don't do it justice. We can try, but they don't really do it justice. It's just such an amazing technique. Mark grew up in Aldermaston village. It's in Berkshire, across from Aldermaston Pottery. And for any body involved in studio ceramics, or who might be out there, you will know that Aldermaston was established by Alan Kager Smith, who sadly passed away earlier this year. And it was there that Mark's father, Edgar, worked for over 30 years, and working, and in more recent years, so Alan Kager Smith and the people who worked with him were known for this amazing reduced pigment lusterware. So this is something that, Mark, you've inherited from your father, and I know after sadly your father passed away, you inherited his notes and recipes, and you now work and you now make pieces using this amazing technique. So Mark, you're very welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, that's right. I didn't actually inherit the skills directly from my father. It was really some years after he had died, my mother passed on his notes, and it kind of sparked my interest. I'd kind of grown up seeing luster, and it always kind of mesmerized me. And it wasn't something I ever felt I would make, but I think the notes just gave me the confidence to take the steps towards trying it. And I also went to meet Alan Kager Smith at his home, and we spoke about it, and he gave me lots of tips and showed me his collection of his favorite luster pieces that he'd kept. So that was a real treat. So I came back and began the adventure of making luster pottery, which is not an easy one. It's an ancient process that started in Iraq in around the 9th century. It's thought to have evolved from Egyptian glassmakers that were putting luster decoration onto glass, and the early Islamic potters started to copy this technique onto glazed pots. It's a technique that kind of evolved at the same time as tin glazed pottery. Tin glazed pottery began at around the same time, and it was an attempt to mimic the early porcelain pottery that these potters had seen from China. So they were trying to make a white coloured pot. So this is why the tin was introduced to a clear glaze to create this opacified glaze. And these two techniques, the luster and the tin glazed pottery, are very closely linked, and that's how they started and evolved at the same time, pretty much. It's shrouded in secrecy most of history, because the potters were so secretive about the technique. Once they'd learnt it, they didn't want to pass it on. So the first time it was written about, I think, was around the 11th or 12th century, with a brief kind of outline of the technique. But then it wasn't written about again for another 400 years during the Italian Renaissance, when a potter recorded the technique. So many times the technique almost disappeared because so few people practiced it, and so few people were willing to pass on the information on how to make it. But thankfully, when the 19th century came around, people were a little bit more generous about information, and it was recorded a bit more. But it was only really until Alan Kager Smith wrote his book on luster pottery that it was properly documented how to make the work. And my father had worked at Aldermaston Pottery for 30 years, so knew the technique very well. And that's how I really came about making luster pottery. It's a difficult process for people to get their head around. I think Caroline has some images. There's that one of me that's painting a pot, and the pot is already glazed, so it's like a finished piece, really. And then the luster pigment is applied on top of the glaze with a clay carrier. The luster pigment is a metal compound, usually silver or copper, and that's mixed with a clay carrier, like a slip, and that's painted on the surface. In the next photo, I think you'll see the finished. There's a finished piece that's unfired, and you can see the wet slip sitting on the pot. And then it's fired in a kiln that you can create a reduced atmosphere. That's the finished piece. So there's a process that we've skipped here because there isn't a photo of it. But once the pot is fired in the kiln, you can see the wet slip sitting on the surface of the pot drying, and that then goes into the kiln and is reduced, which means that the oxygen is taken from the kiln chamber at a certain temperature, and it just reduces the metal compounds back to pure metal, and it's a super thin layer on the surface of the glaze. There is some fusing to the glaze, but it's very much a surface decoration. So once it's taken from the kiln, it has to be, the clay carrier is scrubbed off of it, and the luster is then revealed beneath. So it's an unusual process. What I like about it is its subtleties. There is a commercial luster, which was developed because industry found the pigment luster too difficult to produce, really. So ceramic chemists came up with this really clever way of making gold luster from a bottle, and you put it in an electric kiln, fire it, and it works every time. But it has very little subtlety about it. You paint it on and it's gold. Whereas with the reduced pigment luster, there's
there's nuances, isn't there? And there's subtleties that you
can see the brush strokes, and you can see the thick, the thin, and almost a tonal difference between one end of the brushstroke and another, which you can't get with the commercial lusters. And it's not as garish a gold. It's a very subtle gold.
And this is a technique practiced by, like, not only.
I have a piece here. As you can see that. I'm trying to get the luster to show on it, but you also get lots of iridescent colors because it bends the light waves as the light passes through the luster, which you don't get with the commercial one too. So
and there were very few people, not only, I mean, in Ireland or the UK, practicing this technique. There's very few worldwide.
There are very few worldwide, and I mean, it's a very small community. So I'm in contact with some potters in North America and Australia and the UK. And it's quite a supportive community. So there's always help, you know, and you need it quite often.
Just to say as well that there's, for anyone that's interested in the story of Aldermaston and Alan Cager-Smith, that there's a book came out in the last few years called Alan Cager-Smith and the Legacy of Aldermaston Pottery, you know, which I'm sure would be of interest to people who are interested in lusterware. And it's just as the story of that important British studio, you know, that you know, was from the, was it from the 40s, 50s onwards when Alan Cager-Smith
began in the, I'm trying to think, the late 50s. And yeah, my father joined in, oh goodness, testing my memory now, 64 or something, 60, around the early 60s. But that's also when Alan began experimenting with luster.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, it's a very, very interesting story. Mark, thank you very much. For all three of you, actually, I see we've questions. Have we questions, Caroline or Susan? Do you want to move to questions? I have a few questions, but I'm, you know, we have an audience as well, and I'm keen to include them.
Yes, we do actually. I will say the first question. Can you hear me okay there? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Caroline.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so the first question then comes from Leodin, and she asks, what are your thoughts on growing number of alpaca farms and that there is no factory to process the yarns? From what I gather, these fleeces are sent to the UK to be processed into yarn, and then there they are made expensive. Yeah, Mario.
Mario,
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah, that's cost to this process, I guess. Now, Mario. Mario.
I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
I think this is a problem with this. I mean, there's a lot of fibers. I mean, with this hemp production as well. This is another fiber that is grown in Ireland, like linen, and we don't really have the spinning factories available. I mean, sadly, a lot of them went out of production in the late 70s, early 80s, which is partly the reason we sort of shut our doors as a workshop during my grandmother's time. A lot of production went east for weaving itself, but also for the spinning, or they went to the UK. There's still some spinners in Ireland, and they do have, I think they do have some fibers. I think they've got mohair, and I'm not sure if they have alpaca in there. Donegal Yarns has a variety of fibers. But yeah, I mean, we would value, I mean, it would be great to have a massive selection. And I'm really, I mean, I see alpacas, we're contacted regularly by alpaca farmers who have the fibers but can only spin them in small volume, which obviously the cost per kilo is crazy if that's the case for them. So it's really hard. It's very hard, actually.
So then we have another question, and it is, does Mario make specific efforts to preserve the skills of weaving on the hand loom?
Yes, we have, and my mom. My mom is probably more, you know, she's very much the master weaver, the master hand weaver. So together we would, you know, we'll be preserving the looms. We'll be, you know, these are all old traditional looms, but they're still very, very relevant for today. They still, you know, whenever John was weaving on this loom, he would piece weave from his garden shed. You know, beautiful lengths of fabric. We would, you know, we would make the warps here, bring the warp to him. He would put it on the back of his loom and weave it out, and then we go and we collect the fabric at the end of it and send it to the finishers, just, you know, as they would have done in the 40s, 50s, 60s. You know, so we are trying to preserve it. It's a difficult one because as well as actually being able to hand weave, it's also it's sort of educating and people to the price that comes with that. Because as anybody who you know, makes anything by hand, it's a very laborious process. There's many, you know, to hand weave, you know, in a day, for some of the fabrics, we might get 2 meters woven in a day to, you know, to maybe 13 meters hand woven in a day, compared to hundreds that you can weave on a machine. So that obviously has a price per meter implication. But no, we are. I think the more we show, I mean, we're quite an active Instagram social media account, and I think that it's showing people more behind the scenes and how we actually make things and some of the processes involved and how many hands are involved. That helps us to keep weavers hand weaving.
That's great. Thank you. And that question came from Mary Gallagher. Then we have another one from Mario as well. And we have a few more as well for other makers.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Actually, can I just ask Cara, just in relation to skills, because your daughter is studying silversmithing, and I was just wondering, you know, do you feel there's a sufficient interest in silversmithing, you know, in terms of the courses out there, in terms of that particular craft? You know, how do you feel about it, Cara?
I think in terms of universities and art schools, it's in a very precarious stage.
Really?
Yeah, it really is. You know, with courses closing, you know, throughout the UK and Ireland, and with, you know, that. But that said, there are still a lot of very talented silversmiths out there who want to share their knowledge and want to share their skills, and it's a craft that is not closed off and you know, isolated. It's a craft where people want to see those skills being passed down and are very willing to share them. So I think that, yeah, I'll always talk to people who want to learn how to hammer or, you know, move a piece of metal, because I think that, you know, when you go into museums and you see all these amazing pieces and you see all the pieces that are created now, and you think of, you know, working with that precious metal and working, you know, it's a very important skill, that it's really critical that with all traditional skills, it's not just silversmithing. It's a problem with all traditional skills, because like Mario was talking about, the loom and the hand weaving and the time that is involved, none of the things that we are talking about today are a quick fix. Everything takes a lot of time, a lot of preparation. It doesn't always go right. And, you know, whether you are super skilled or just learning, we all, you know, it's that idea of ensuring that in this fast-paced society, that people still can take that time just to make and not be thinking, you know, for all of us as makers, days, hours could go by and you suddenly look at your clock and think, oh my goodness, there's 4 hours and all I've done is, you know, put a few grains of enamel onto a bowl, you know.
But it's so important, and it's something that Vern and I have talked about, isn't it, Vern? You know, the importance of retaining these skills. And
yeah, absolutely. And I think, Cara, I mean, that was so eloquently said, but just something else you said, which was so important earlier, you mentioned the kind of particular mindset that you inherited growing up in your family, being problem solvers, and that fixing and making and coming up with a solution, and coming from that culture of fixing and making, you know, to make solutions. And of course, that's the big thing in design, and we need our kind of students to understand that. But the craft background of the making really helps that you can, you know, you have that mindset. And that's just something that Frances and I were really interested in, is, you know, so you've got the skills being passed down, but also that particular mindset. So that was just really important, that point you made earlier.
And I think there's more of that coming back, I think, you know, because it's oh, sorry, I'm getting double feedback. It's more that's kind of coming back, you know, that we've gone through that idea of that throwaway society, and people are now starting to think, okay, well, maybe I could darn the jumper, or maybe I could fix, you know, put a new handle onto something. You know, I think we are starting to realize that the planet we can't just keep making and throw it away, you know.
But also, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to butt in, but I was just going to say also there's an added value that we associate with the product that we're making, that when, you know, as consumers, we sort of, I think we're looking for value, and you know, when you can show how much love and attention, and there is an element of risk in all the way through the process, there's an element of risk, you know, at any point this, you know, whatever, the weave can go wrong, the warp can go wrong. I imagine with much of the other crafts, it's the same sort of thing. You know, you can fire a pot and you know, it can come out and it'll be all wrong. There's that element of risk, and I think that it's the human side of what we're making that sort of makes the product live. For me, I feel like a fabric is really alive. It feels alive when it's hand woven. You can see the imperfections or the fluctuations in, you know, in the rhythm that somebody might be beating in the warp threads or the weft threads.
Absolutely, and we also get a sense into the wonderful history of these crafts. Myrna and I came across a great Paul Greenhall quote: to engage with many of the craft practices directly is literally to be touching history. I think it was one of the quotes that we had that we thought was nice.
It was, and I think as well, just to pick up on that word, Mario, that you used, love, and like the love coming through. you know, I think that's such an important word as well, because it's not just love of the craft or love of the, you know, the process, but this exhibition was also quite personal, because it was about your families and the love you have for your families, and the human side too. But also you mentioned risk there, and Mark, is that, you know, that you talked about that process where, you know, what comes out of the kiln is almost a bit like kind of magic. Is there a bit of sort of kind of, obviously there's a huge amount of intricate detail in your process, but does it sometimes feel like magic?
It does when it goes right. It can also be very tragic. But yeah, no, it does feel like magic. And of course, it was alchemy, you know, was science when this technique was first, you know, tried, I suppose. So it still feels a bit like that now, and it's very rewarding when you get a spectacular pot from the kiln. It is.
Sometimes you can have very happy accidents, I think, in the kiln as well.
You can. Yeah. It's a funny process because you never get exactly what you're expecting. And sometimes I've taken pots from the kiln and it's taken me 2 days to like them because I wasn't expecting what I got. And I dismissed them, and you know, they'd nearly go in the you know, spoiler bin. And I'd reassess them a few days later and think, actually, they've got some really lovely qualities that I've overlooked because I wasn't expecting that result. So
One
yeah,
of our audience, Michelle, says it can be black magic sometimes. I hope that's a positive thing, Michelle.
Yes.
I think we had a really interesting question there. I'm not sure who by, possibly Chris, and he talked about, or his question was around kind of maybe the role of intuition or interpretation for, you know, the role of maybe education within passing down skills as well. So, you know, the wonderful recipe books that you have, you know, you've inherited, and looking at those. But then there's also an element of your own interpretation, of course. Does anybody want to pick up on that point?
That's reinterpreting the skills that, yeah, okay, the work, the archival work or the work. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that yeah, we can all get textbooks, or we can get notebooks that have been passed down, you know, but there has to be that idea of how somebody shows you. So when Mario's talking about, for example, he's talking about the books and the recipe books with all those things, he's got, you know, there's not a blank canvas there that you're working from, Mario. Sure, there's not. I mean, you've got that. No. You've got that knowledge, and you've got your mum, and you've got, you know. So if it's the same as with any skill or craft or technique, you know, if you look at how to do something, if you don't have any of that help, and suppose what we're all saying is that, you know, for myself, having grown up in that family of makers, there, you know, those conversations have been happening, you know, right the way through. So there's not probably the same, I don't even know what that word means. You know, if somebody's talking about raising a piece of metal, I know what the word is, even if I didn't know how to do it, you know, earlier on before I went and studied.
No, I agree. I think whenever I got back involved with the workshop about 8-9 years ago, I mean, there were many things that I found that were in there that I didn't realize, the sort of information that I must have been storing all those years, and like from a child, it just all made sense. The loom makes sense, the mechanics of the loom, of the yarns, you know, you live with them. So, you know, you see the fabrics, you sort of have a relationship with them, you understand them. But also, I mean, from the people that I've met over the last 8 years, and the skills and the appreciation of those skills, and what I've learned from them is, I mean, that's the thing, all over Ireland, there's you know, all age groups, and, you know, some of them, I suppose there's people out there who've got incredible skills who are maybe considered to be retired at this point. Like my mom keeps telling me she's retired, but, you know.
Mario, we have a wonderful question from Sarah Flew, who's a recent graduate. And she just said, hi all, thank you for today. I'm a recent graduate weaver based in Dublin. For my graduate collection, I have based it on traditional textiles and how we need to preserve these hand skills and traditions. I have had no past generations in art or even design, but I hope someday I can pass on my knowledge and skills. I have developed a passion for hand weaving. Please, any tips and recommendations for a recent graduate in Ireland?
Oh gosh. If it wasn't the current situation, I'd say come and visit.
Someday.
Having that passion is the best start, because it's a long process of learning. So having the patience and really just I've asked and spoken and communicated with as many people as I can. I mean, I will always be asking questions, and I'll always be, a weaver. Any craftsman, you've never learned everything. You're always learning. It's a matter of learning, learning new processes, experimenting. I mean, I think in Ireland there still is this hand weaving culture. I mean, a lot over on the West Coast in Donegal. I mean, there's many hand weavers there. I just, when we're able, at some point in the future, we should maybe visit some of the looms and just see how people work, see how their workshops are laid out.
Louise, that's perfect. Thank you. Louise also asked a question: is there a challenge in getting young people to learn these traditional craft skills? And that's open to all makers. Yeah.
For me, the challenge is the time and is being allowed to make the mistakes, which anybody learning needs to have the materials. It's a costly process of learning when you're you can be weaving something for a week and it just might all go bad at the end. I don't know if that's the same with pots or with silver. I mean, I'm sure with all of our crafts it's similar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's the challenge with making the luster pottery is finding the time to stay at it, to create a kind of continuation of learning and keeping that process in your head, because we all have to make a living, and the luster process is a bit of a luxury for me. So I do have to make pots, day-to-day pots to sell, which can fund the luster adventure. So that's the challenge for me, and it doesn't always work. So it has that extra expense. You've got a percentage of failure, which is almost unavoidable.
Cara?
And I think that the challenge for silversmithing, for any silversmith, but especially for those just starting out, it's the expense of the metal. So you could have all the most wonderful designs and ideas, but you need to have money in order to buy the raw material, because it's not cheap. So you need to make sure that what you're making, and it's something I've talked to a lot of people about, is how can we allow them to make it and then, not maybe borrow the silver as opposed to actually buy the silver, that the silver then can go back and be refined, etc. But they would have that skill and knowledge of working in silver, because yes, you could make it in copper, but it's not the same. It's not the same metal. It's not got the same qualities. It's not got the same movement. So it's the expense and the equipment.
Yes.
We're looking at workshops that have got years and years and years of tools in them. It's ensuring that there are, and quite often, because silversmithing is so noisy, people don't want to share a workshop because it's there.
We have a comment from Christopher as well, and he just says, I'm not a silversmith, I'm a digital product designer. I worry about the future of our culture when courses like silversmithing are closed down because they are expensive to run. If universities close silversmithing courses, where will this culture be passed down through the generations?
Well, I think that's what we were saying earlier, was that idea of all traditional crafts, you know, where do people go to learn lusterware? Where do people go to learn weaving? You know, how do we as makers ensure that the next generation, and there is that generation who are out there who are excited and who do want and have, as Mario was talking about, the passion. You know, it is about having that passion and perseverance, but it's ensuring that there are places for all traditional crafts, that, you know, that it's not lost. It's really, really critical.
Yeah, I think we have been reminded of well, a number of things. As Mario said, it is a lifelong learning process, isn't it? You never stop learning. And I think, again, you know, that the importance of, and how vital it is that we retain these skills courses, whether it's ceramic skills, textile skills, metal, you know, whatever the skills are, to try and retain what we have and even build on what we have, how important it is. You know, to keep these wonderful skills alive. I think that's a very strong feeling among people.
It is, and if I could just echo that as well and say, I think within HE, within higher education as well, and in formal education, so primary and post-primary, you know, the importance of having programs like Craft Ed and Craft in the Classroom, because of course this is an exhibition where the theme is about families of makers, and not everyone, you know, has that, you know, opportunity. So, and you see that, I would have seen that myself kind of working on primary school craft education programs. So the importance of those as well to continue in Ireland, giving those, you know, young children the chance to do some of those traditional crafts in new and innovative ways that they wouldn't get the chance to do at home. So you're right, Frances, on the continuation of that.
And I just see a question here from Suzanne regarding, I won't ask the panelists to answer it, do you take on any interns? But I think it just raises the question that, I think that we could nearly do another seminar just focusing on recent graduates and tips for recent graduates, because you all have so many experiences that you can share. It's almost another seminar.
It is.
There was a question in there from Roisin de Butler, one of the other exhibitors, and that was, what did you learn that was new about yourself and your craft legacy from taking part in this show?
That's a great question.
Good question. Okay, someone else.
I think I learned what I said at the end, that thing that, you know, coming from a family of makers where you fix things, you don't throw them out, and that you know, I think I kind of had that sort of nearly like sort of realization of, you know, thinking about there's a solution to every problem. That was quite, you know, when I started to write some of the stuff, you know, when you were asking us to inform you, Frances and Muireann, at the beginning about, you know, what being a family of makers means. I think that for me has been very important.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out actually was from choosing from the archives to then bring back in, and looking back at the archives. It was during this process of looking back at the archives, you could see how the influence, how there was this rolling influence from the previous work, but then influence the next generation, which would put their slight spin on it or their mark on it. And then, but there was always this going back and forth between, even though my grandmother's not sadly she's not here today. I'd love her to be here to see all this, but we're still, I still feel like she's very much involved in the Newmorn textiles. And you know, and that's what it should be. It's sort of, just focus, allowing that to happen, not disregarding everything from before, but continuing and just building on it.
We have another question actually.
Sorry,
Just
respond to Roisin's question about what was new.
One of the things that I learned was not to try and make luster ceramics to a deadline, so but it's important to save really good pieces of your work for exhibitions, so that you're not under pressure to produce really good examples, you know, because it can go terribly wrong for you. And especially when you're displaying them next to your father's kind of magnificent pieces from excellent luster firings, it really puts the pressure on. So I hope I achieved that anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mark. Absolutely.
There's one or two last questions I think we might have missed along the way. So Greta earlier asked Mario, do you add some of the techniques or traditions that other countries have in textile productions into your own creations, like a fusion of many cultures around the world? Mario.
I think they might have existed in my, basically we've always started with the archives. You know, that was our fixed point. That's at the point when the workshop wasn't going, the archives were there. So that was the route that we sort of hung on to begin with. But because my grandmother did a lot of traveling in Asia, she lived out in Calcutta, and she lived in China for a while, and she's Norwegian. I mean, I'm a bit Spanish, half Spanish. Anyway, we sort of very much a multicultural family. And I think that influenced a lot of her textiles. I mean, I think and you know, maybe it does subconsciously. Not consciously. I haven't ever seeked out another culture's technique and brought it into the workshop. But I think from a design element, maybe from the simplicity of some of the designs, from paring it back to being quite a simple sort of graphic form. Potentially that was influenced from Asia, from when she lived in China. I'm not sure. I know that we a lot of the rugs, or the Milano rugs, we use chopsticks. But she must have just come back from, I think she's in Calcutta before she based herself in Ireland. So we've been using chopsticks, if that is an influence. They're very good for looping the yarn over as we weave.
Great, thanks Mario. There was a question in there from Hilary Morley. Would one of the makers like to comment on the impact of COVID on motivation and creativity?
It's been very difficult. It's been very difficult for everybody, but it's definitely been very difficult, I think, for creatively. A lot of makers can't get to their workshops. And obviously that's got major implications, but I think that for those of us that can, are fortunate that we can be in our workshops, that difficulty is having that sort of brain fog and not having the creativity, and also with things, that unknown, and exhibitions moving or commissions moving. It's, I think we're in for maybe a bumpy ride coming out of this the other way. But I think what's really interesting is listening to everybody here and listening to that passion and drive. We'll all get there, we'll all keep going. But yeah, I have found it personally very difficult.
Yeah, we found it, I mean, I'm fortunate I'm living in the workshop. So from that sense, we're very, very lucky. But there's many processes in textile productions, from the finishers and from the dyers, from the spinners, and it's basically, we all have to be open to be able to I can weave a length of fabric, but then if the finisher isn't open, then it can't be washed and it can't be finished, so it'll just sit on the floor in my workshop. So until we're all open, it's very hard to produce. We can sample, we can do all of those sort of things, but the production chain needs all the links so that we can actually have a product at the end of it. And weavers.
We have a comment. Thank you, Mario. We have a comment from Emer Doolan, and she said, "Hi there, I'm a PME at NCAG and a textile designer also. I wonder if any of the craftspeople," sorry, the questions are flicking up, but she's wondering basically if any of you craftspeople would be interested in calling to the schools because she wants to engage more with the students and craft makers who are professionals in their practice. So maybe that's something for you to contact. We can get her details later and forward them on to you, okay?
There was one or two last questions there. One from Laura, for Mark. She was asking, she's been making ceramics for a while and would like to hear just a small bit more on the challenge of segregating the bread and butter work and the true intent kind of passion pieces that take more time, and should they be separated into different identity work?
Yeah, they probably are really separated. I don't segregate the time.
We've lost you there, Mark.
No.
I just, there's, you know, ceramics has a process to it, so I make work, the other work, which
We're just contacting Mark
you know,
now.
is more reasonably priced and sells in my shop here in craft shops. The luster is a something I do when I can give it the time. It was, I didn't.
I think
Okay.
we've lost Mark
Yes.
there. There's another question or a comment here from Pauline Kiernan, and just wanted to say this insight into the makers workshop spaces is inspiring. I love that all the makers are not only passing down traditions, but also the generations are working together. And Caitlin Murphy just joined there, Cara's daughter. I feel so grateful to be part of this exhibition, and it's made me really appreciate coming from a family of such amazing makers as my mum, granny and papa. Thank you. Oh, that's lovely. Lots of thanks and positive comments coming in there. I think it's been really, really positive.
Can I just, because I think we're coming to an end, are we, Susan? Can I just mention things before I finish up? I mean, firstly, for anyone who would have seen images of the exhibition, 2 of the makers were unable to be part of this, and I just want to mention one of them, Ryan Connolly. He grew up alongside his father's business, who his father is making domestic furniture in the 1960s, 1970s, and still is. And Ryan now has a business. Ryan has a workshop, and he makes bespoke and limited edition pieces, and he has a beautiful lounge chair and side table in the exhibition. So I just wanted to give Ryan a mention. And I suppose just to finish up on my behalf, to thank Cara and Mario and Mark. It's been wonderful working with you. You're inspiring, as are all the makers that I work with. And it's been great to have the opportunity to work with you over the last while on this exhibition. And I'm sure Maureen will join me in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your presentations and the conversations this morning. And like Frances said, like, you know, one of the things that we've loved over the last 2 years is getting to talk to you, getting to research about your practice, and you know, and so we've really just enjoyed that. So thank you so much for allowing us to do it and for being part of it. And just to say that the conversation continues after a lunch break, because we're kicking off at 2 o'clock, isn't that right, Caroline? Where we're going to have 3 more of the artists and designers who are in the exhibition generation, and they're going to be talking at 2 o'clock. So maybe have a short break and log back in and join us at 2 o'clock, where we're going to be talking about some similar themes that popped up this morning, but we're going to be looking at the kind of the culture of making and hearing from Roisin de Butler, Catherine West and Hugo Byrne.
Thank you.
Perfect.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, guys. We look forward to seeing everybody later.
Thanks, everyone. Really great discussion, and wonderful to see the studios. There's just been some technical queries in relation to the gallery view. So we just want to ensure for the next session that everyone is able to either use the gallery view, which shows all of the audience in smaller boxes, or we'll pin the speakers, and we might just do a little quick tutorial on that before we start the next session for those who are joining, if that's okay.
Thanks.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.